minister. Weird. State of emergency called for the Calgary water pipe. We can't fix the water pipe. This reminds me of when Mel Lastman called in the military to shovel some snow. Do you guys remember this? Toronto was very embarrassed, very, very red in the face, and not because it was cold, because Toronto had a snowstorm, and Mel Lastman said, yeah, come in and help us clean the railroad tracks. We can't shovel snow. Very interesting. So the military got some shovels out and were deployed to Toronto to help shovel snow in the early 2000s. And this is just as embarrassing, right? Like, we can't fix a water pipe. Oh no. So I'll show you that. And it seems like there's more to it than that. I've got some color on just water in general. What's going on with water in general? Water wars. I've got a little conversation talking about how China moved early and realized that, like, what do you get with this fresh water? And it's food. Right? This is the argument being made that food is what you ultimately get. So China bought up farmland in foreign countries in order to use the farmland, dispose of the waste in the farmland, and export the food, thereby essentially concentrating water into a pig, for example, right? And I thought, man, that's kind of diabolical, right? Like, that's some 5D chess there, China, with water, etc. Water wars being what they are today. I thought that was a very interesting kind of situation, and so I'll share that video with you. Today we're going to start with Tucker Carlson as well, and I think, so he's making here a point that I make often. He's talking about how revolution we seem to be on track for a revolution, and he's saying, listen, I don't want a revolution, and I say that often. Like, I do not want a war. Wars are bad. They're bad for well, I mean, they're great for business, but they're bad for chocolate cereal. They're bad for like a regular kind of way of life that we've come to expect in the West. And I like that way of life, and I'd rather not have it disrupted with a giant war or anything to that effect. So while I think that we're on track for a conflict, while I think we're on track for a war or a revolution, to use Tucker's word, I'm not advocating for that. I'm pointing it out, just like I would be pointing out, like, oh, it looks like we're on the westbound subway train today. We're sitting here on this westbound track. I'm not advocating it either way. We just are. I'm stating the fact. And so it's interesting seeing other people kind of reiterating my, exactly what I think, right? And I mean, it's Tucker Carlson. So here you go. Here is Tucker Carlson talking about what's going on in the West with regard to leadership and self-governance and what's really going on, right? And this applies to Canada in that we have knowledge and have had knowledge for at least a year, March 2023, that people in our government have been influenced by foreign actors, right? And so that's treasonous. The government knows about it and has done nothing, and we're not allowed to know about it. And that seems wrong because it's our government, right? And so this applies, I think, quite a lot. So lots to get to. Let's get to it. Here we go. Here's Tucker Carlson.
What could possibly be the pretext for hiding what our government is doing if it is in fact our government? If this is an exercise in self-government, if this,
right? And so, like, what could be the excuse if this is our government from keeping from us the traitors in our government currently? Oh, well, you can't know about that, national security. Yeah, well, it's our government, for crying out loud. What is the excuse?
It's a, whatever you want to call it, constitutional republic, democracy, whatever. If the people rule, what possible justification could you have from hiding something from me? Because it's my government. Well, of course, the answer is because it's not your government. It belongs to the people who run it. The organization exists for its own sake, not for yours. You just pay for it. And that kind of justifies revolution right there. Now, I'm not rooting for revolution. Don't want one. A lot of people will die. I don't know if it'll work. They leave lasting scars. I'm very anti-revolution. However, as an academic matter, you have the groundwork for one, because the system itself is based on a lie. And the lie is that the government serves the people. And that, of course, is not true. What could possibly be?
Right. And I think that is the other point that I often make. It's if you honestly look at what these people are doing and you assume that their goal is to serve the people, then what they're doing makes zero sense whatsoever. But if you look at what they're doing and then you assume that their goal is to serve the 2030 agenda or globalist goals or something to that effect, then suddenly it all makes sense. And weird, right? And so how does that jibe with, this is my government that I voted for, and if we want to change courses, sure, it might it might be difficult. It might be difficult in a political sense. You got to, find the people who support that idea, but it seems like a lot of people don't want to do what we're doing. So why can't we change course? Right? And we can't change course, of course, because we don't know what course we're on. Right? They're not telling us. CBC News, let's talk about the foreign minister and Russian ships docking with Canadian ships in Cuba. Holy smoke. So CBC says Canada has accepted an invitation to send a patrol ship to Cuba while the Russian Navy is in town. This means the Royal Canadian Navy is now sharing an anchorage with the Russians as a guest in the port of Havana. Weird, right? Allen says no Canadian naval vessel has visited Cuba for more than 50 years until Justin Trudeau came to power at the end of 2015. And here we go again. What an embarrassment. So Canadian warships sharing an anchorage with Russian vessels in Cuba, as reported by CBC. And it says the Royal Canadian Navy now finds itself in the unusual position of both shadowing Russian warships as a threat in the Caribbean and sharing an anchorage with them as a guest in the port of Havana because Canada accepted an invitation to send a patrol ship to Cuba while the Russian Navy is in town. And it's not clear just who in government or the military knew about the invitation from Cuba. The Caribbean nation has been a full-throated supporter of Russian President Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, and Cubans have been fighting alongside Russian soldiers in that country for several days. I didn't know that. That's news to me. So interesting, right? So take it with a grain of salt, though. It is CBC News, okay? For several days, the frigate His Majesty's CS Ville de Quebec has been tasked with shadowing the Russian ships, which conducted missile exercises during their Arctic crossing using Moscow's new Zircon hypersonic missiles. The Ville de Quebec is part of a 3-ship group that tracked the Russians along with the U.S. destroyer USS Truxtun and the U.S. Coast Guard cutter USCGS Stone. A Canadian CP-140 surveillance plane flying out of Jacksonville, Florida, is also keeping a close eye on the Russians. The destroyer USS Donald Cook also appears to have joined the mission in the Caribbean. This is a YouTube video of Russian and Canadian Navy ships visited by Cuban tourists. So in one part of the world, I feel like we could do a really good Canadian television show or Canadian content piece, having the juxtaposition between the two ships. One ship is tracking these Russians and it's super serious and military and we got to be quiet, the Russians are there. And then on the other one, it's you see the Canadian pull up beside the Russian ship, and the Russian ship is a big modern looking warship and the Canadian ship's kind of a clunky looking, well, here's the picture of it, it's kind of rusted and kind of crappy, right? And then it's there's the Canadian ship, and then it's the Cuban visitors, and the captain's kind of angry because it's anyway, I feel like it could be funny. They're having Cuban visitors on the ships, and I mean, that's weird, right? Yes, welcome to our Canadian Coast Guard vessel. Here is Mel Jolie, and she had no idea about any of this. A concerned Canadian says, how could Jolie not know about the warships in Havana? It's hard to rationalize how Jolie was given this mandate. It's clear it was clearly a function of DEI and woke ideology, not based on experience or expertise. Woke ideology and DEI, that's being kind. Right? I thought Trudeau just liked her because, but maybe not. I mean, Trudeau may not swing that way. Right. Here is Pierre Poilievre responding to Mel Jolie's video, and I'll play it in just a minute. I just wanted to get all the responses out first. Poilievre says, while our troops are starved of resources, Trudeau spends defense budgets sending a Canadian naval ship to Cuba alongside the Russian Navy to honor Cuba's brutal communist government, proving he wasn't kidding when he said he admires communist dictatorships. Reckless, radical, and dangerous. And James says, unbelievable, Trudeau Liberals sent an RNC patrol vessel to celebrate the communist regime in Cuba, all while Cuba is hosting Russian Navy warships. And now the Liberals are claiming that they didn't know. Mel Jolie honestly says, well, I will have to get back to you on that. Nobody told me we sent a warship down there. Here we go.
Okay, a lot of this is being driven by Russia. I mean, obviously China as well, but Russia it would be the primary player as one of the 8 Arctic nations. Yep. There is this strange thing happening in Cuba, Minister, that I'm wondering if you can help me understand. The HMCS Margaret Brooke, which is a patrol vessel from Canada, gone to Havana for 3 days starting tomorrow to celebrate Canada-Cuba bilateral relations. And there's some eyebrows being raised because it's in port at the same time that Russian military vessels, including nuclear-powered submarines, are there. Why would Canada have a Canadian ship in a Cuban port at the same time as Russian military vessels are there?
Listen, this is something that I have to look much more closer to. This is an information that is news to me because the Minister of Defense also works with CAF and DND on this very issue. But of course, we'll look into this and get back.
The CBC knew. There was enough time for the CBC to print out like what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. So very interesting that Mel Joly didn't know. The other question is, of course, why are we sending a military vessel down to Cuba to celebrate Cuba's communist dictatorship? That's another question. While the Russians are there is a good follow-up, but like, why did we send a ship in the first place? Right? Seems kind of weird. Here is, I'm going to move that to the Ukraine part. And believe it or not, the Ukraine part is a little bit further down the show because we have to talk about the traders in Canada. And I wanted to talk about the warship with Russia, and that's a separate story than what's going on in Ukraine. So we'll talk about Ukraine in a minute. So we'll just have to wait to see from Trudeau. First, we've got to talk about what's going on in our parliament and traders in our parliament, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like, again, the only solution, the only way to solve this problem is to print the names of the people suspected of working for foreign interests, all of the people suspected of working for foreign interests, dissolve the government and hold a new election. Paper ballots only. Paper ballots only, period. That's it. That's how you solve this problem. But they're trying to weasel their way out of this. Ryan says, of course, this trader is questioning the report. Did we expect anything else from this corrupt criminal? Unbelievable. CTV News is reporting Trudeau calls into question the findings of the stunning watchdog foreign interference report. So he's not sure that that's actually what's going on. Brian Lilly says, watch this Trudeau clip very closely. He's asked multiple times whether there are Liberal MPs named in the NSICOP report. He refuses to say. Then he starts casting doubt on NSICOP. They're liars. They're liars, he says. It's 3 minutes long. We're not going to listen to the full 3 minutes. We're going to listen to the first minute and a half. It's the first minute and a half where he talks about how, where he is asked about the Liberal MPs and the names, and he dodges the question. He doesn't answer the question. And it's very clear he's not going to answer the question. Here we go.
Are there currently any MPs in your caucus?
Too fast. My bad. Here we go. Currently any MPs in your caucus? We'll try again.
Mr. Trudeau, Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Are there currently any MPs in your caucus that are named in the NSICOP report to be wittingly or semi-wittingly participants in foreign interference?
The issue of foreign interference is one that this government has taken incredibly seriously since 2015. We brought in the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians over the objections of the Conservative Party and indeed the strenuous resistance of the Harper government for years. We brought in a renewed NSIRA for oversight over our national security instances, and we created specific bodies of experts, of top civil servants to ensure the integrity of our elections. We've also called a number of different reports, including an ongoing report on foreign interference that we're working with right now to see how they can follow up on the NSICOP report.
We've heard from Mr. Singh and Ms. May. They have both said that there are no members of their party who are named in the report. So I'll ask you again, are there any current Liberal caucus members named in the NSICOP report that are wittingly or semi-wittingly participants in foreign interference?
I will allow Mr. Singh and Ms. May to speak for themselves.
Last question.
Hi, it's Annie Bertrand-Oliver with CTV National News. Just going back on that, but why can't you say any more? Singh and May have both talked about this report and provided substantially more details than you have. So why are you unable to provide any details about what is in this NSICOP report?
I think it's important that Canadians have confidence in our ability collectively as a democracy to defend the institutions and the processes around our elections and our democracy. That is why officials are engaging with the foreign interference inquiry to see how they can follow up on the NSICOP report.
So he's not answering the question. Not answering the question whatsoever. And it's interesting to see the news reporters push but they still don't get any kind of satisfactory response, right? National Post says Canadians should know if they're being asked to vote for alleged traitors. Yeah, at this point in time, how could you assume that any of the politicians in the House of Commons are working for Canadians? Because of all of the news about the depth of the interference, right? It's just, I mean, it's so broad. I mean, from BC to BC senators and casinos and money laundering and laundering through real estate, inflating our real estate market. Like, this goes back years and years and years. And it's not a small problem. Like, it's a multifaceted, multi-layered problem with people who expect returns on their investment. Like, the money's not just going to disappear, right? Like, last week, this is the National Post, last week's bombshell report from the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians on Foreign Interference offered parliamentarians of all political stripes yet another opportunity to put aside their partisan differences and stand up for the sanctity of Canadian democracy and our national right to self-determination. Instead, our political leaders have given wildly different accounts of the scope of the problem and continue to offer up excuses as to why voters should not be equipped with as much information as possible when they head to the polls in the next election. NSICOP's 84-page report confirmed much of what we already knew through media reports and previous inquiries, information that Prime Minister Trudeau and his Liberals have continually tried to downplay and discredit. We have known this. They have said it's not true. Now NSICOP publishes a report that confirms this, and they're saying, oh, well, NSICOP are a bunch of liars. But the committee also bluntly stated that it seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-wittingly or wittingly participants in efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. Not good. Not good. It's very bad, in fact. And so the whole wittingly or semi-wittingly, that's nonsense. Like, if somebody says, I'm going to leave this bag full of money here, and I hope you vote the way I want you to, and I hope that bag of money disappears, and you take the money, you took a bribe. You didn't like wittingly help somebody. You took a bribe. You committed a crime, right? If somebody says, ring, 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 hi, what happened in caucus today? And you're like, I shouldn't tell you because I'm a member of caucus and I've taken an oath, but blah, 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 blah. You've committed a crime. You didn't semi-wittingly like spill your guts. You didn't semi-wittingly aid a foreign interference situation. You committed treason by breaking your oath and sharing private information, delivering secrets to an asset, right? Or you're an asset, I don't know. But you're fundamentally committing a crime for your own benefit, right? Like, if somebody calls you up and says, if you tell me, I'll give you a trip to Cancun, and you're like, okay, sounds great. And then they just run it through taxpayer dollars anyway, right? So the whole thing is, it seems like something to mislead. It seems like a way to mislead us, and we are being misled. So this whole wittingly nonsense. Here's Zachary, and he's saying, well, I'm saying what he's saying, and he's saying what I'm saying, and I thought it was well said. So he says, dissolve Parliament, release the names of the traitors, the traitor MPs, charge them with treason, and ban them from all future elections, hold a new election. I added paper ballots only. I think paper ballots only is the only way to do it. Andrew Coyne, Mr. Israel, Ukrainian flag himself, says, and Toronto police believe Canadian politicians exposed to PRC blackmail in underground casino sources. So this is from the Bureau.news. So that must burn Coyne's bottom, right? That the Bureau is doing so well. Anyway, regardless of all of that, I think that this is part of that multi-layered, multifaceted access situation. They've got senators in British Columbia. They've got lawmakers in British Columbia. They've got lawmakers in Ottawa. They've got lawmakers in Ontario, right? These are all different operations, probably similar people, probably a similar pot of money, because it seems like, I think, Canadian politicians are cheap to buy off. I really don't feel like it costs very much money to purchase one of these politicians. And so believing that Canadian politicians are exposed to the People's Republic of China blackmail in underground casinos, I don't think is far off. I've seen news reports of it. I've shown them on the show, right? Where they're looking through a casino that was in a house in Richmond Hill and they had a polar bear, remember? and they were saying this is all connected to money laundering and Chinese triads and all the rest of it. Oh, I changed my profile picture if anybody's wondering. I bought a book on how to grow my Twitter audience, and it's like it had good reviews, and I thought, okay. So I read half of it yesterday, and I started implementing some of the things that it said. And do you know what happened today? I lost 3 followers. So that was funny. I was like, hilarious. Because like I changed my profile picture and I changed the background, and there's some couple of things I changed. Changed the bio to talk about what I actually do rather than whatever. And yeah, resulted in net loss so far. So yay. That was pretty funny. Okay, let's talk about food and water. I'm going to talk about raw milk in this series, but this was very, very interesting to me. The first part of this, they're talking about water and water wars and more conventional. And then the 2 minutes to 4 minutes, they talk about how China moved first and how they use the water, the fresh water, wherever they can find it, and then they ship the food back. And that's how China's dealing with this. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so we'll listen to the first bit first.
In the 21st century, it's looking more like, oil was the commodity of the 20th century, gold, diamonds, these things. But in the 21st century, it looks like the rich and powerful are increasingly turning to control food and water as, like the basic necessities. And we're just seeing a ton, whether it's foreign governments, wealthy Wall Street corporations are all beginning to turn to it. I think now Bill Gates' family, they're the largest farmers in the U.S., right? Like they're now the largest farm landowners in the U.S.
You kind of broke this story that this was happening years ago.
Yeah, because before this, before I started working on this, dude, I knew nothing about any of this, right? Like I came into it cold turkey, and I was asked to look at China's largest meat company buying the world's largest pork company, which was based in Virginia. And at the time, Congress was kind of freaking out, like, is China buying, our meat supply? And so I was asked to look into it because I had this background in digging into Hong Kong financials where this meat company was publicly traded. And I went to China, I talked to folks in the US, I talked to people in US intelligence, and it turns out, like the Chinese government was behind this purchase that's effectively 1 in 4 American pigs. And the reason is because the Chinese government kind of clued into something before other folks, which is that in the 21st century, food is power, right? Like you need to control food to control your political future. And so the Chinese government began putting into these 5-year plans that they put out an effort to go overseas and begin buying up food and water resources so that they could control it.
So it's a strategy that was happening.
Definitely. I began thinking, okay, so if China's focused on this, like what other, wealthy countries are focused on this? And lo and behold, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was one, right? Because believe it or not, even though it's a desert country, it had these huge underground water reserves, aquifers underneath the desert. And that's why, there are springs, flowing to the surface of the desert that are mentioned in the Bible 2,000 whatever years ago. And starting in the 90s, they began using their oil derricks to tap into that water and actually use that water to grow wheat in the desert. So this wheat country by the 90s was the world's 6th largest exporter of wheat.
Wow, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. But dude, that water doesn't last, right? And so they drained it. And so those springs that are mentioned from 2,000 years ago, they went dry.
Gosh.
And so then it's where are they going to go? And that was the question I had in my head. Okay, so if they drained their water with this program, where are they? Yeah, man, that's when I found them in the Arizona desert. I'm talking saguaro cactuses, Wile E. Coyote, desert.
Yeah.
And they were doing the same thing, pumping up this ancient water that doesn't get replenished from rain because it's there from the last ice age or something. And then they use that water right there to grow alfalfa. And then they ship the alfalfa from Arizona basically to Los Angeles, put it on a ship, and then ship that alfalfa, which is hay, all the way back to Saudi Arabia, because that's how you move water. Like, you couldn't fill enough oil tankers full of water to effectively move water. What you do is, if you're water short, you use the water wherever it is to grow the crops, and then you ship the crops. Because we use 70 to 80% of the water, fresh water around the world, we use it for food. That's what we need fresh water for, food. Okay. Or like in the case of pigs, you can grow all of the grain, right, that the pigs are going to eat here in the US, and then you feed that grain to the pigs, and then you ship the pigs back. And so like a pig is an even more concentrated form of water. They call it like virtual water is what an economist would call it.
Wow.
And so then you grow the grains here, you feed it to the pig craps all over the place. You end up with these like giant manure lagoons, which are toxic. Those are here. And you slaughter the pig, and then you ship the meat back. So you get stuck with the shit and they get the meat.
Wow.
See, I thought it was long, but I thought it was worthwhile. There's a couple of concepts that he was touching on there. The virtual water, right? Like, you take the water, you put it into a different resource, you ship that resource, and now you've taken the water and you have this tradable resource that you control. Okay. And the person who has the land, if you control the company, you can sell the land, or the company can go bankrupt. But fundamentally, wherever Virginia County has to deal with that toxic mud puddle if you didn't deal with it correctly. And I'm sure there's a way to sustainably farm pigs dealing with their manure. I'm sure you don't always deal with these mud puddles or anything like that. But water wars are already underway. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what I'm saying. They've already started to commoditize this. We're already starting to see it at macro levels, people taking water. And I mean, it's been happening since the 90s, taking water, moving it into another resource. And also, I think that the water probably replenishes like the oil replenishes, right? Like, oil takes a certain amount of time to replenish. Water would take less time to replenish. Those aquifers might take 100 years to replenish, but I'm sure they'll replenish. I don't think you need an ice age to replenish those deep underground aquifers. But again, I could be wrong, but that's just my gut feeling. But water wars are already underway. Here is Kirk, and he's talking about Gondik, and this is in Calgary, and they've declared a state of emergency about the water pipe, and that's pretty wild stuff. Mayor Gondik declares a local state of emergency for Calgary because of a broken pipeline. City of Calgary knew for decades how poor our underground infrastructure is and did nothing about it. Naheed Nenshi got 2 pensions to leave Calgary in piss poor conditions, and Gondik is completely clueless, just like the execs at City Hall. Heads need to roll. Time to get the city out of the way and throw everything at the private sector to come in and fix this ASAP. We need the full audit and transparency with what is going on with Calgary's infrastructure. After constant tax increases, it's never been worse. Yeah, and here's Gondik declaring a state of emergency. Wild stuff.
At 8 a.m. this morning, I signed the paperwork to declare a local state of emergency for the city of Calgary. This is not a decision that was made lightly. But as we shared yesterday at 5 p.m., the investigation of the broken feeder main pipe revealed that there are 5 more areas that are in need of repairs. Our city operations team has shared these necessary repairs mean that we are looking at another 3 to 5 weeks before water is flowing as it normally would. At 8 a.m. this morning,
3 to 5 weeks. And I said the other day, like, this shouldn't have taken more than 3 days. And if it took more than 3 days, people would be very, very upset. And like, I can't believe we're stretching into much more than, has it been a week already? And like, people are starting to be upset, and rightly so. Gray Matter podcast says he's responding to Calgary water woes, 3 to 5 weeks more of restrictions. He says, this is a hoax designed to implement a key WEF objective. The Premier and her government must put an immediate stop to abusive Calgarians by the Calgary Mayor and Council. There is a rushing river flowing right through the heart of the city. This is COVID 2.0. I can't help but agree. I really feel like, and yesterday, and I haven't got to the comments yet, so sorry guys, I haven't read it. But yesterday we were talking, and the day before talking, there are people on CanadaPoly.com on the paid comment section who are saying on one side that this is definitely within reason, and then other people saying that this looks like the same thing that COVID looked like. And the longer this drags on, the more they look like, oh no, we can't fix it, everyone. The more I agree. It feels like this is COVID 2.0. I think there's a way to fix this pipe temporarily. You get the water back in flowing, and then you twin it or you tap off it. You like, while the pipe is down, you tap off and get a secondary pipe. You build the secondary supply pipe. And once that secondary supply pipe is established and able to bypass the rotten pipe or whatever, you turn the secondary supply pipe that you just built on, and you fix the main. And bingo, bango, bongo. Like, this is not rocket science. Like, and competent people would have been doing that before this catastrophic failure happened in the first place. Honestly, like, you would have got a flyer in your mail, like in your physical mailbox, saying your water will be off because we're turning it off to do this between this time and this time on this day, blah 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 blah. And then they'd put in the tap off thing, and then they'd be able to turn it off and turn it on, build the secondary supply pipe, build the secondary supply pipe. Well, it's not tapped in. There you go. Just build the pipe, fix the freaking problem. But they're using it to control us, I think. Danielle Smith says, here's an update from the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver, on the state of the local emergency issued this morning by the city of Calgary. I want to thank all Calgarians and those in the surrounding areas for reducing water use while crews focus on repairing the damaged water main. And there's a whole statement here, but I'm not going to read it. True Grit Graham says, UCP is once again allowing tyranny in Alberta, exactly like COVID, doing nothing for water, a basic human need in one of our major cities, and also playing stupid by allowing 15-minute cities in Edmonton. UCP, are you a uni party too? Albertans are getting to the end of their patience. We won't vote NDP. We will make a new actual Conservative party that will move towards severing ties to federal Canada. Maybe the Alberta Republic Party needs to rise up. We are done with useless baby-kissing politicians. What's your game, Danielle Smith? I can't help but wonder. Theo Fleury says, just fix the pipe already. Only commie mayors would deny people water, but here we are, straight out of the WEF playbook. Gondik says, given the declaration of the state of local emergency, my bonus was my only Neighbor Day event this year. I was grateful to spend part of my morning with a community that embodies strength and determination. Together we will tackle the water crisis ahead. Right. So they are leaning into this, and they are using it just like COVID did, right? Like, we'll all stay home, stay safe, and we'll get through the water crisis together. Together we will endure a drought. Like, come on, give me a break. I just saw this and I thought this was interesting. Epoch Times says Louisiana to legalize sale of raw milk. Right? Like, terrifying. What happens if people get sick? I'm just kidding. Raw milk should be just fine. The food professor says Cargill beef processing plant in Guelph has been on strike for 3 weeks now. While workers are asking for better wages, Canada is importing more beef for Eastern Canada. Last year, 21% of all beef consumed was imported. We will likely break the record this year. They're doing everything they can. And if you read the history of the First World War, Germany was having labor shortages and strikes the same way. Well, not necessarily exactly the same way, but it was led by the communists to destabilize Germany's war effort because they essentially had won the war by 1917. Anyway, regardless, looking at history, all of these strikes, all of these labor demands seem more and more designed to take down the company that they're within rather than supplying the worker with a reasonable wage. And people are greedy. So if you tell somebody that they're worth $100,000, they'll believe you. Like, people are greedy as all get out. And right or wrong, right? Our society encourages greed. Have you listened to the music, et cetera, et cetera? Also, speaking of music, I listen to oldies sometimes. The tone of the music and the lyrics of the music in the 1960s were often talking about people being dissatisfied. My boyfriend's back, like glorifying relationships, but also like glorifying new relationships. Divorce was a big theme. But the sound of the music itself was very, very different. Whereas now it's kind of coarse, and like rap is kind of cacophonous, right? Like there's a lot of punchy sounds in the music these days. And in the 1960s, it was very melodious and like musical, and you had guitars and you had all the other stuff. It just seems the music now, even like Taylor Swift, the first album of Taylor Swift when she came out, it was very musical based. The songs were honest, kind of from the heart. Now it seems like, and I can't stand the new Taylor Swift music. I don't think I've listened to a song that I've liked of hers in years. but the music sounds kind of monotonous and like something somebody repeats to themselves by themselves, not something that somebody sings together. It just seems really, really strange, drastically different if you compare decades in music, and it's very, very weird. Baby, It's Cold Outside versus WAP. You know what I mean? Like, it's very, very different. And I'm Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful